Just so you know, this show is about scary stuff. So don't say I didn't warn you guys. And remember, don't be scared.
Episode 39. Early Incels. Premeditation is a terrifying factor when it comes to a murder case. How long had the killer thought about this? How well did they have this planned? And in some cases, how could someone convince a friend to help him kill? It's happened again and again throughout history. Two kids getting the idea that killing would be fun, and maybe even easy to get away with. Leopold and Loeb from the olden days, Klebold and Harris from more modern times. But even before Littleton meant Columbine, there was Jonesboro. Look deeper, and we see parallels to the Isla Vista shooting near Santa Barbara, California in 2014. Not technically a school shooting, but a school-related mass killing nonetheless. Not only do both cases revolve around school and getting revenge on classmates, but they both deal with the more contemporary issue of incels. Many have become familiar with the term incel through the Isla Vista shooting and car attack in 2014, as well as the Toronto van attack in 2018. Both Elliot Rodger and Alec Manassian are considered incels, or involuntary celibates, men who by UrbanDictionary.com's definition are people, usually male, who have a horrible personality and treat women like social objects and thinks his lack of a sex life comes from being ugly, when it's really just his blatant sexism and terrible attitude. Even when they see other quote-unquote ugly men with girlfriends, they consider these men to be tricksters who have somehow beat the system and can get women despite being cursed with unattractiveness. In other words, they're respectful to women and women are attracted to their personalities, but incels can't comprehend such a phenomenon. They believe that women owe them sex, and many of the more extreme incels like to spend time in incel communities on the internet coming up with ways to make women have sex with them, often involving genocide of people of color, taking rights away from women, raping them, and other horrid, disgusting things. They can't understand that this is precisely why women want nothing to do with them. In other words, basically creeps who don't think they're creepy. Way back in 1998, this concept and term were far from the forefront of society's consciousness, but it seems possible that one of these two boys in this episode felt the radical movement beginning to stir inside of him. Or maybe not. You guys be the judge. So, before there was Littleton or Isla Vista, Newtown or Parkland, there was Jonesboro. 100 miles northeast of Little Rock, Arkansas, sits the small town of Jonesboro, population about 50,000 when this story took place. The newspaper accounts from 21 years ago mention nothing of any other school shootings, as back then they weren't frequent enough yet to be of mention or nationwide concern. School shootings have taken place since there have been schools and guns. As I speak these words, there's already been 22 school shootings resulting in injuries or death in the United States in 2019 alone, and the summer is barely half over. You're going to hear this story 3 different ways. From media reports spanning 1998 to the present, which is generally considered to be the full story, and then from each of the shooters themselves, in their own words. Just over 1 year prior to the most infamous school shooting in history, 13-year-old Mitchell Johnson's mother said he ran inside and told her he had missed the school bus. He bolted in, told her this news, and added that his stepdad would drop him off, and out the door he went again, no questions asked. As it turned out, his stepfather had already left for the day, leaving the family's van at home. Mitch jumped in the van and headed for 11-year-old Andrew Golden's house. The pair then attempted to use a propane torch to gain entry to a gun safe belonging to Andrew's dad. He was the co-founder of Jonesboro Practical Shooters Acquisition, a local gun club that Andrew shot target practice at on weekends as a means of quality time. Mitchell's mother never suspected that he'd taken the van, since she'd assumed her husband had left in it to take him to school and go on to work. When they couldn't bust the gun safe at Andrew's house open, they gathered all the firearms that were laying around in plain sight, 3 handguns. Survival gear, firearms, ammunition, food, and even a map they drew to a hideout were all packed into the van. They next hit up Andrew's grandfather's home, who was a state game and fish officer and had quite the collection of weapons. The kids busted into the home through the basement, using a crowbar to pry the door open. 11-year-old Andrew grabbed the key to his grandfather's gun rack, removed 10 high-powered rifles with scopes, and gathered 4 handguns from beneath the mattresses. They were finally ready. The kids selected a vantage point in the woods, heading on foot to where they had a clear view of exits from their middle school. A witness saw Andrew run in from his spot, pull the fire alarm, and head back into the cover of the trees. Lunch had just ended and 5th period had just begun. It was 12:30 p.m. on Tuesday, March 24th, 1998, and Westside Middle School in Jonesboro, Arkansas was under attack. Mitchell and Andrew had been planning this ambush in plain sight. 13-year-old Mitchell Scott Johnson, the oldest of 3, was known as an exceedingly polite and helpful boy. His mother recalled the calming effect he had on his toddler sister and how he was always great with his 11-year-old brother, who was in the 5th grade. Mitchell's parents bitterly divorced when he was 9, after he had already endured years of torment at the hands of an angry alcoholic father. His mother, who was a corrections officer at a prison near Spring Valley, Minnesota, where he was born, remarried, finding love with an inmate. When he was paroled, the new family moved to Arkansas, where Mitchell experienced a tumultuous transition. Though his mother considered him a role model to his siblings, his peers described him as a bully. He sought out fights in his neighborhood and was remembered for aggressive mood swings. Mitchell spent quite a bit of time going between Arkansas and his home state of Minnesota to share custody with his father, which he hated. While there, trouble began to brew. In 1997, at age 12, Mitchell was charged with the inappropriate touching of a 3-year-old girl. It would come out years later that he said he was molested by an older neighborhood boy at a local park when he still lived in Minnesota. He stated it began at 8 years old. Trial for this charge was scheduled to take place in the summer of 1998. Here's a clip of his mother after the massacre.
Mitch was always Jesse's kind of downtime, I guess. He would sit and read to her. Probably 8 times out of 10, she'd fall asleep in his lap at night. He was truly a good kid.
11-year-old Andrew Douglas Golden's home life seemed much more stable, though things are hardly ever what they appear. Born in 1986 to parents who worked for the post office, Andrew spent a great deal of time with his paternal grandparents. But while teachers remembered Mitchell Johnson as polite, they remembered Andrew Golden as sneaky. In kindergarten, he shot a girl in the face with a pop gun he had filled with rocks and gravel. And more recently, he'd been accused of shooting a neighborhood girl's cat, throwing it in the curbside trash can. Barely breaching 4 foot tall and happy to play trumpet in the school's band, it's hard to believe that any 11-year-old could help premeditate and carry out an ambush involving 10 guns and hundreds of rounds of ammunition. The nation and world would soon know exactly what kind of damage adolescent boys could inflict. With the fire alarm buzzing, the teachers led the kids out back to the designated meeting area on the school's playground. Their targets within their sights, Mitchell and Andrew opened fire on the playground and shot at the frantic and confused students and teachers for more than 4 minutes. When police descended upon the scene, witnesses directed them toward the woods outlining the perimeter of the school. There had been sightings of 2 camouflage-clad shooters heading deeper into the woods. It took less than half an hour for investigators to apprehend their youthful suspects, and they were flabbergasted. They hadn't known what to expect when en route to the scene, but this certainly was not it. Parents began to receive word and descended upon the high school, when word spread again that it was actually the middle school that was under fire. When the dust had settled, 5 people were dead and a further 10 wounded. 32-year-old teacher Shannon Wright was shot in the upper body, receiving mortal wounds as she shielded a student from certain death. 11-year-olds Brittany Varner and Natalie Brooks, along with 12-year-olds Paige Ann Herring and Stephanie Johnson, all died from their injuries. Classmates interviewed recalled Mitchell specifically voicing threats of violence against girls who had broken up with him.
He was like, whoever didn't like him or whoever broke up with him, whoever he thought was a snob, he was going to shoot him, like he was going to bring a gun the next day and shoot him.
He was always talking about he was going to do it, and I never thought he would.
He always talked about he was going to do what?
He was going to come and shoot people and bring a knife to school and stuff, and I never thought he'd do it.
His most recent ex-girlfriend was injured, and according to her mother, she had just broken up with Mitchell Johnson 4 days before the ambush. Although neither boy ever mentioned targeting female students and staff, attorney Bobby McDaniel later pointed out that 14 out of the 15 shooting victims were female. Calling this random is inaccurate. It's a statistical improbability. Back in 1998, juvenile offenders under the age of 14 were dealt with in the juvenile system. Arkansas state law prohibited children that young from being prosecuted as adults, regardless of the crime. So Mitchell and Andrew were adjudicated delinquent in juvenile court, receiving the maximum sentence allowed, incarceration in a juvenile facility until they turned 18. On August 11th, 1998, Mitchell Johnson's 14th birthday, he was adjudicated delinquent in juvenile court. Mitchell expressed that he was sorry for his actions, saying he meant to aim above everyone's heads and that he hadn't meant for anyone to get hurt. He was sentenced to an indefinite period of juvenile incarceration, possibly up to his 21st birthday, with the inclusion of federal gun charges. Had he been 14 when he participated in the massacre, he could have been tried as an adult for murder. 12-year-old Andrew Golden attempted to plead temporarily insane. However, the judge would not accept such a plea. He changed his plea to not guilty and received the same sentence. Andrew did not address the victims' families, survivors, or the court. When handing down the sentences, the judge said, "Here, the punishment will not fit the crime." Upon their release, both shooters' juvenile records would be wiped clean, viewable only by a minimum law enforcement level background check. Craighead County, Arkansas DA said this would be a death penalty case, but for their ages. At the time, the state of Arkansas did not have a facility to house juvenile inmates past the age of 18, and Governor Mike Huckabee vowed to build one